All right, welcome to this explainer. Today, we are taking a serious journey into the dark. We're counting down the top 10 horror stories in America, but listen, this isn't just a random list of jump scares. What's really fascinating here is how we can trace the actual evolution of American horror mediums. Like how the very things that terrify us have totally mutated over the decades. We're going to be tracking these shadows as they move from, the crackling embers of an old school campfire straight into the cold, glowing void of the digital age. Let's get into it.
The last man on Earth sat alone in a room. There was a knock at the door. Just let that sink in for a second. In exactly 17 words, your entire sense of safety is just stripped away. It's the perfect micro scare, and it instantly sets the vibe for our countdown today. Because sometimes the absolute most terrifying things are the ones left completely unexplained. Why? Because our own minds will just eagerly fill in the darkest possible blanks. So, what does this massive shift actually look like? Well, we're starting with the simplicity of classic physical folklore. Those cautionary tales whispered around campfires or huddled in the backseats of cars on pitch-black nights. But as our tech evolved, so did our nightmares. We're going to see how terror transitioned into the multimedia complexity of the digital void, living inside internet forums, deep web databases, and corrupted VHS tapes. It is a wild shift from fearing our physical environment to fearing the psychological traps of the media we consume every day. Okay, kicking off our countdown at number 10, we have a quintessential piece of American folklore, the hook. Now, you've probably heard this one. It's the iconic urban legend about an escaped asylum patient with a literal hook for a hand, out terrorizing young couples parked in remote spots. This one has terrified teens for generations, mostly because it acts as a brutal, visceral warning, right? It's all about the dangers of venturing too far away from the safety of the herd. It preys on that incredibly innate human fear of being hunted in isolation. Coming in hot at number 9 is The Missing Boyfriend. The setup here is just classic horror. A broken-down car, intense isolation on a dark road, and an unseen, crazed man lurking just outside those locked doors. Kind of like The Hook or the famous Bunny Man legend in Virginia, this story preys entirely on our physical vulnerability. Back in the day, horror was all about physical space. It was about asking, who is out there in the dark with you when your car engine suddenly dies? It completely exploited our instinctual fear of real-world predators. Actually, let me ask you something. When you're walking to your car in a pitch-black parking lot late at night, have you ever checked your back seat? Come on, we've all done it. That lingering dread, that is the absolute legacy of classic folklore. But what happens when the threat is no longer hiding in the back seat, but hiding on the screen right in front of your face? I just saw my reflection blink. Okay, take a breath. That is another quick, 2-sentence horror palette cleanser to get us ready, because guys, we are officially leaving the physical world behind. We're now plunging headfirst into the golden age of internet storytelling. And this brings us right into a whole new era, the creepypasta. For those who might not know, these were basically copy-pasted internet horror stories specifically crafted to blur the line between myth, fiction, and rumor. They are literally the modern digital equivalent of gathering around a glowing campfire in the dark, just passed from forum to forum instead of person to person. What makes them so incredibly effective is how they mimic real urban legends, but they're perfectly tailored for the web-savvy reader. They weaponize the total anonymity of the early internet to make us seriously question what was real and what was just a story. Which leads us perfectly to number 8 on our list, the expressionless. Originating as this wildly influential early web legend, it tells the story of a mannequin-like woman who supposedly appeared in a California hospital back in 1972, just completely covered in blood. The story is bone-chilling purely because of how she's described. Like, she's almost human, but not quite, and she smiles this horrifying toothy grin that literally paralyzes the medical staff. It hits the uncanny valley so perfectly, proving how text on a screen could conjure these unbelievably vivid monsters that completely short-circuit our brain's ability to recognize a normal human face. Moving on to number 7, we've got the legendary Candle Cove. It is absolutely wild to trace how this story unfolded. It started brilliantly as a simple message board thread in the 2000s where users are just reminiscing about this cheap, terrifying children's television show from the 1970s that they all seemingly watched. That is,
until the terrifying realization hits that the show likely never existed at all. It is an absolute masterpiece of format. It exploits the unreliability of our own childhood memories, and it eventually became so culturally massive that it even inspired a 2015 television adaptation on the sci-fi show Channel Zero. Now, we actually have a tie for this next spot, which I think perfectly illustrates the massive scale and evolution of Reddit's horror community, specifically the r/no sleep forum. At number 6 is Pen Pal, which is a story just dripping with highly realistic psychological dread about childhood stalking. And right next to it, tying at number 5, is the Left/Right game. Now this one takes a completely different route, diving into vast, cosmic dread and alternate realities. Both of these masterpieces originated on the exact same platform, which goes to show just how sophisticated and diverse internet horror had become by the 2010s. They effortlessly tap into totally different parts of the human psyche. The terrifying fear of a mundane, real-world threat versus the absolute terror of the incomprehensible. My TV keeps turning on by itself. It's annoying. But what's more worrisome is how it only shows footage of me standing in my living room. All right, shake that one off. Without Little Microscare, we are transitioning away from traditional text forms and into something way more structured, clinical, and frankly, vast. Coming in at number 4 is SCP-173. The truly crucial point of this entry is its format. See, originating on a 4chan board, this wasn't written like a normal story at all. It was written as a clinical, heavily redacted containment document, outlining the strict procedures for housing a hostile, animated concrete statue that snaps necks the second you break eye contact. It is such a brilliant concept, and it single-handedly launched the entire SCP Foundation. It takes the supernatural and makes it feel terrifyingly bureaucratic and real. And ultimately, it turned into one of the largest collaborative fiction universes on the entire internet. And with that, we have finally arrived at the current era of our countdown: analog horror. This subgenre is all about using uncanny verisimilitude, basically making things look incredibly, distressingly real. It relies on liminal spaces and the distorted, grainy aesthetic of old VHS and camcorder footage. It literally weaponizes your own childhood technology and the empty spaces you remember, turning pure nostalgia into deep, suffocating dread. It works so incredibly well on us because it corrupts the very media formats we used to trust for information and comfort. Let's move on to number 3 and see how this builds into an absolute cultural phenomenon: the Backrooms. Created by Kane Parsons when he was literally just 16 years old, this project took a super simple internet creepypasta and evolved it into a breathtaking, suffocating masterpiece of liminal space horror. With its hypnotic, sickly yellow wallpaper, the constant buzzing of fluorescent lights, and just endless procedurally generated cubicles, it became this profound metaphor for existential dread. It essentially traps you in a dissociative maze where the space itself is the terror, perfectly reflecting that modern anxiety of just being lost in a meaningless infinite loop. Coming in at number 2, we have what is arguably the flagship project of the mainstream analog horror movement, the Mandela Catalog, created by Alex Kister. Now, this series is uniquely terrifying. It uses simplistic visual distortions, we're talking literally basic image manipulation here, to create these horrifying doppelgangers known as alternates. Set in a fictional Wisconsin county with this really dark satanic subtext, it almost intimidates you into second-guessing your own perception of what looks normal. It evokes this primal paranoia that you simply can't shake, just this chilling idea that the people you know, or maybe even your own reflection, might be a sinister imposter. And now we have reached the absolute pinnacle of our countdown. Number 1. There is simply no other series that could sit atop this list. It is Chris Straub's Local 58. Debuting back in 2015, this was the genuinely groundbreaking web series that essentially birthed the entire analog horror movement as we know it. Without Local 58, almost nothing we just discussed in the modern era would even exist. It is so easy to see why Local 58 sits unchallenged when you look at exactly how it manipulates the viewer. It presents itself as this lost late-night public access television channel broadcasting bizarre paranormal propaganda. In one famous early episode, a weather service alert is issued with these absolutely terrifying contradictions. First, it says, "Stay inside." Next, ignore the screams. And finally, stare directly at the moon. It completely subverts the familiar narrative conventions of emergency broadcasts to deliver something totally unpredictable and deeply unsettling. It weaponizes authority, making the very systems that are designed to keep us safe turn entirely against us.
So, we've traveled all the way from the physical dangers lurking on dark, lonely roads to the intense psychological manipulation of our own digital screens. I'm going to leave you with this final provocative thought to take with you today. The old internet stories warned us that if your voice suddenly stops echoing, you should definitely cancel your road trip. But what are you supposed to do if you're already home? Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer. Keep your eyes open out there and hey, try to get some sleep tonight.